Welcome everybody. This is Dishaw, and today on Always Forward with Dishaw, we're gonna do an architect's view, I'm joined today by some enterprise architects that are deeply familiar with this topic, and we're gonna explore the state of frameworks versus reference implementations. Where are software architects leaning today in the maturing Node.js and digital landscape to help direct their temes and help align the capabilities of those that are working with them. So I've got this all-star lineup. First, today we have a sponsor, Willbot. Thank you, Willbot. Mental health impacts us all. If you want to join Willbot, Node.js, machine learning, AI, all of the buzzwords with a great mission, head to willbot.io/jobs and check out their offering. And big shout out to Rising Stack. I'm currently in Budapest, and my hotel Wi-Fi was nowhere near anything that I could possibly rely on. And Rising Stack has graciously hosted me here, and really appreciate that. So give them a shout out. So let's go get introduced to our panel. To my right, I have Ahmad Nassri. Ahmad, why don't you introduce yourself and give the 2-second overview of what all the things that Ahmad does.
2 seconds, already done.
2 seconds. Minute and a
half. My name is Ahmad Nassri. I am the principal architect at TELUS. TELUS is a telecom based in Canada. And as you can imagine, telecom companies, we do a little bit of everything and a little bit too much of some things as well. I contribute to a number of open source projects. I'm heavily active in the Node.js community, and I organize a number of conferences and meetups and events in Toronto and around the world. And yeah, if you're going to ask me anything, ask me about either dogs or technology, because those two things are my passion.
Nice. Then we have Joel Chen of Walmart Labs. Joel, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Joel Chen. I'm a principal architect of the customer engineering organization at Walmart Labs. I lead the web application platform, and I've been in software for about more than 20 years. Before Node.js, I've mainly doing C, C++, and low-level stuff, and mainly proprietary project. But ever since I started working on Node.js, all the companies I've been working for are very open to a very big proponent of open source projects. So since then, a lot of the code and the project I worked on has been going open source, and I've been making contributions to our open source projects. Thank you.
Awesome. So speaking of open source, we've got an old guard open source individual who has grown into the ranks of architects with Aaron Heckmann. Really happy to have you joining us. Aaron, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Aaron. So right now I'm over at PayPal, and I am leading a team that focuses on the Node parts of our platform. We have a lot of different development teams, different languages, and our team focuses on Node itself. And we support, I don't know, tons of apps, hundreds of apps at PayPal. They're all built on Node. So I'm focused on making it better as a whole, kind of looking at what we've been doing, what do I think we should be doing, what does everybody think we should be doing? It's a pretty wide topic there. Yeah, and before that, I've worked on a lot of things in open source in the past, not so much recent, but I think the big project I worked on open source was Mongoose. I worked on that for a few years when I was at MongoDB and LearnBoost.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we've got a lot of enterprise experience, a lot of open source passion, and the new guard. If you'll permit me to sort of lay the stage for software architect. The previous generation of software architects were UML jockeys, and the current generation of folks these days probably don't even know what the heck UML is. I'm probably dating myself just by mentioning it. I'm sorry. And today's generation are hands-on practitioners that are really facilitating and helping guide the teams in the direction. So before we get into the debate, I'd like to frame the software architect a little bit, so folks that may not be familiar with the role and its purpose in an organization, figuring out what that looks like. Ahmed, do you want to sort of give us a little bit of an overview of what a software architect is in the enterprise context, and maybe a little bit of the history, because I know you're passionate about that area too.
So I think one good way to define these kind of things is to talk about what a software architect is. And that can touch a little bit on, as you said, the old guard or the history behind it. So a software architect shouldn't be or is not a person who just produces diagrams and UMLs or whiteboards. A software architect shouldn't be a person that works in a silo. A software architect shouldn't be a person that focuses on one aspect of technology and ignores the rest, or at least is not knowledgeable of the rest. I think those are kind of like the key foundations of talking about what, like as you said, the kind of modern way of looking at software and technology in general. So in that context, a software architecture role and the role of a software architect is a collaborative role. It's a role about facilitation. It's a role about discovery rather than dictating of what direction should be or decision making. So the role of a software architect is also contextual to the team that they work with. So if they are part of a delivery team, or if they are part of a strategy team, or if they are part of a platform team, definitely has different context and different meaning. But to me, at least in my world and the way like our teams are set up, I would say the main focus is the facilitation and the collaboration aspect, and ensuring there's a healthy technical culture and discussions around the technology choices that we're making. It is not so that the architect is the de facto decision maker. It's actually more about them surfacing the right questions and surfacing the right answers through collaboration and through working with others. And they're afforded that ability and that opportunity to do that, partly because of experience and prior knowledge of things, but more importantly because typically, the architects is not going to be directly affiliated with the delivery of a project or part of a certain kind of a backlog of work that might actually be part of daily activities, because what usually happens is you're not afforded the opportunity to think strategically about something when all you have to do is ship by a certain date. So there's that balance that I think the architect role gets to bring to the table in that regard. But ultimately, there's a level of experience and a level of history that comes in with the role, and so it's a level of seniority. But I also would say, and I reminded, like this actually happened recently, I'm reminding my own team members too about this, is that the role of an architect is a role. The seniority is a senior developer, right? Senior developer is the seniority level, but the role is an architect. There's also a different type of role. There's a role of a tech lead. There's also the role of just the most senior developer on the team. The seniority is the same for all these roles, but the context and the purpose is different. So as I said earlier, the purpose of the architect role is to help facilitate and bring in the right conversations and collaborate with the team members so that the decisions made are made in a strategic sense.
Got it. There was no history of this role in that explanation. Very accurate description of where we are today. But that role in the past, especially in waterfall systems, hasn't been that engaged. And I think in part the waterfalliness of previous generations really led folks to be architects to be defining requirements rather than a facilitator or an enabler of the team, where requirements are rolling downhill. And the previous generation of architects maybe never saw the actual output or the final product of the code, and if anything, they were validating that requirements were met. So not even in a product or customer engagement capacity, it's checklisting at the end of the waterfall. Things fell down all the way through, or fingers need to be pointed.
Yeah, I would add to that by saying I kind of alluded to it by saying what an architect shouldn't be, but I didn't expand on that. It's a sensitive topic for me too, because I wrote about this a long time ago, and it's something that as a developer working in a startup you'll probably never see. As a developer working in an enterprise company or as part of a bigger team that's even growing further, historically you would have had these type of roles that are, let's call them the architect roles, that end up being disconnected completely from your day-to-day. And as you said, they act as a checkpoint, and they act as, well, let's just see the diagram. Does the diagram look good? Great. I hereby sign off on this, but I have no responsibility towards it. Right, and that missing duality of you're responsible and accountable, and you want to be a sign-off point of view, that's missing from that role. There's also the fact, like historically, you would see development teams work on, like you said, the waterfall approach. So what you plan ahead of time is nothing related to what you actually end up delivering, because you've been working on the thing for a year or a year and a half. So things evolve and things change naturally. So it's unsuccessful to think that there's any given point in time where a senior person, let's say, can review and determine what a project looked like and then disconnect from it completely and then expect the same outcome at the end of that long period. Again, without any of the accountability and responsibility. I think there's also when I joined TELUS, and I have the title principal architect, it kind of was a little bit of a knife, because I kind of hated that title. I think there's big value in architecture, but the title itself comes with a lot of negative connotations. And again, like I said, from the enterprise and the kind of corporate history of it, as you said, a friend of mine who works in consulting, and they did kind of technology consulting, he tells me he used to go to the banks and sit with all these architects, and they would diagram things on a whiteboard for hours and put them into big plans and big ideas, and then when it comes to the actual implementation details, they would literally just write on the wall, the rest is just implementation details. And that doesn't matter, right? As long as we have a diagram, right? The diagram tells the story, but the complexity and the cost and the effort is all in the implementation details, and that's what's usually overlooked.
We're done. So let's talk a second about what day-to-day looks like. Joel, what does your day-to-day tend to look like?
Yeah, like you said, soft architect these days doesn't mean like UML diagrams. I still do quite a bit of coding, and my day starts like checking our Slack channels to see like what people has question with, what problem people has coming, and half the time kind of answering questions that's been asked a lot of times before, and trying to see what question to put on our FAQ, and then I also talk to all of our other different departments. Like I'm mainly responsible. I have the direct responsibility for the Node.js and the web application platform, but we do have interaction with every other team at Walmart Labs, and they a lot of them are constantly implement new features, coming out with new things, and then I have to talk to them, making sure that what they're going to do doesn't break our Node.js applications or framework. And then if they come up with new things, I have to figure out what we need to update to work with them, and then I have to work with all the teams to figure out when we have something to update, what is the consequence to them, what it means to all the app teams, because if we make a change that breaks some app in our life, that means someone may get called and up at 3 a.m. in the morning, but that leads to a lot of unhappy developers. So I have to basically making sure that any change from any team or anything one of our developers make that doesn't have it's not going to break things. I have to make sure that there are the sufficient tests that's added for new code and answer questions and go around and doing supporting our training material. We have new developers coming on almost every month, and then we have training, and I have to go support training. And I have to basically think about documentations, making sure that our developers have the resources they need to onboard to developing application with the Node.js and the modules and libraries and framework that we offer here.
So Aaron, how is open source, working in open source prepared you for working in this sort of a role?
That's a good question. I think, well,
or has it not?
I mean, in general, no, it definitely has. I've had a lot of different roles, and each one has taught me something valuable. The open source side, I think I've found coming into so I've been at PayPal for under 2 years, but and it's the biggest company I've been at in maybe like 9 years or 8 years. And I think what I learned about it in open source really applies very much so, in fact, to a surprising degree within PayPal. PayPal is a big company. We have thousands of engineers, and I don't know, somewhere around 800 or so, maybe more, people working with Node.js. And with that many people, it is a community as well. We have our own community within the company, and it is a different community than the public Node.js community, but it is a community. It's so Mongoose had, I don't know how many people following it when I was working on it, but a lot. And you start open source project was like a community things, and how do you communicate well with a large number of people, and what is the potential downside to small mistakes in your communication? Never mind the bugs that you inevitably write, but even the communication, if you're not careful, can really cause a huge support burden. And so I could point that area out as like, that those principles apply within a company with a large number of people. Again, it's the same general, pattern, right? You have a lot of people who care about what you're doing. In this case, there's just software with a different name on it. That's used mostly internally. Some of it's public. But yeah, we need to be, you can apply the same principles, how you release the software, those release notes, how often you're releasing, how well you share out what's going on. It's easy for a smaller team to, kind of be not stuck in a corner, but not sharing what's going on and not showing the progress because there's so many people involved. And how do you disperse this information? The tools you have available are a little bit different internally than they are publicly. But yeah, I mean, I guess it would be, mainly about communication, I would say, if I'm going to talk about open source internally versus externally. And I would follow that with a comment about an overarching theme we have within PayPal, which is called inner source. And it's more of an explicit attempt to incorporate general, popular, successful open source management principles within a company itself. And, I think how that plays out is, make your code bases public or internally public so anybody in the company can see them. Write good documentation for them. include the contributing guide and things like that, pull requests, templates, issue templates, all that stuff that comes along with GitHub. Use those tools, refine those tools so that you can foster more adoption for your own project, even if it's internal, even if it's like a product repository where this is not platform code, it's not like reusable module, this is the actual experience, right? So it's a standalone thing, but it affects those projects as well. And because inevitably what happens is it's the same pattern. There are people who care about this piece of software. They would like to see their changes in it, or their new feature in it, or their enhancement or performance improvements within it, because it helps their own team, right, or in their own mission. So these techniques of really, it's open source, but very specifically, I would say GitHub is a really good example of how this stuff works. We incorporate that internally, and it helps immensely. I would say there's some rough edges that play out, but I don't think that they're really any different than what happens in open source. And here's what I mean. You've got this project you're maintaining in open source, whatever it is, doesn't matter. So person X, Joe Smith shows up and he's got this feature that he really thinks is important. He's put a lot of thought into it, or she's put a lot of thought into it, a lot of effort, and maybe they even wrote code. And the thing is, sometimes it's just not a good fit, and so that plays out too, even with applications internally. A team will really want to land something, but that's where it comes down to really working together. I think you have to over communicate in those circumstances. Because they may not have the context. Maybe you're cool with the change, but they may not have the context into how the app or the piece of software works. So being proactive there, and you need a commitment from those software owners to put the time into review and think through the stuff. Architects can be involved, as we were defining earlier. That's definitely a factor there. But yeah, I think a lot of it's all about communication and managing expectations. Same patterns, though.
Right on. I need to take a quick sponsor break, so let me go full screen. Boom. Thank you very much to Woebot for sponsoring Always Forward with D. Shaw. Woebot is a company focused on bringing mental health best practices to everybody through an app-driven workflow. Woebot is doing work around cognitive behavior and helping those of us. Mental health impacts us all, but unfortunately, not all of us have good mental health and good self-care regimens. Woebot helps bootstrap that process and enables you to sort of ease into a mental health regimen that you can proceed with healthcare. There's Joe Doyle, who heads up engineering at Woebot. If you're interested in Node.js, if you're interested in AI, if you're interested in natural language processing, like I said, buzzword bingo, but really with a heart. So check out woebot.io/jobs. Ping Joe Doyle. Joe had the opportunity to work with Joe at NodeSource, and is one of the co-organizers of SF Node. Can't speak highly enough about Joe and his team there. So if you're interested in that space and want to join a great startup, check out Woebot. Thanks a lot. All right, see if I can gracefully transition back out. Nice. All right. So let's bring this back into our topic of reference architectures and reference implementation and frameworks. Vince, I'm gonna let those questions sort of sit for a bit. I want to make sure we get into this broader debate around this. I wanted to make sure since if you're outside of the enterprise, you may not be familiar with the role of a software architect. I wanted to make sure we had a little bit of framing, but I don't want to rabbit hole too hard on that because our topic is the debate around reference implementation and corporate frameworks. So let's tee that up by discussing what are the best practices and standards that we're trying to get our teams to follow. Aaron, do you want to start there?
Surely. Best practices. Yeah. Well, so here we have an approach. We've got tools that we use in-house. They're not open source. Yeah. Some of them are. We need to help people to understand how to use them and why and when to use them and when not to use them. I think it's a huge thing is just educating people on what to do. Like you come into a company that has a large amount of software already, a lot of tools. Some of them are open source tools that we're running at scale. Some of them are homegrown to serve specific needs, and we've got interfaces for them, modules for them. It's a lot of training, getting people up to speed, and more than anything else, on why would you use this and what is it for? We do provide some help out of the box, some getting started materials and application templates and things like that. And what surprised me was that those things are more important than I maybe would have expected coming from smaller startups for many years. It's just it's kind of hard to get started because you don't have a wealth of open source material around you, because we're based mainly on Express today as far as Node goes. And so people know that, generally speaking. Not everybody does, but if you know Node, you probably know Express. And then we have a lot of other custom things on top of that, and configuration and stuff. And so we really want to get people out the gate running quickly. I don't personally think we do a great job. We do an okay job, and we do that through some of these templates that we have. We do have some repos that are just examples of how all these things are integrated and et cetera. But there's definitely a learning curve, and it's an important curve to smooth out.
So Ahmad, what are you what best practices are you trying to get folks focusing on, and what standards are you looking for them to make sure that they're adopting?
So what we've done, we have this thing called the reference architecture. It's actually open source. If you go to github.com/tellus, you'll see it there. We publish our kind of choices of technology, and we publish the kind of the why, the what, and the how of each of these choices openly. And we kind of do this in a democratic fashion, in an open kind of conversation. Anybody can come and challenge it or change it or update it, however it would make sense. So those kind of represent our standards and our best practices. But then what happens is I'm just as Aaron said, we have starter kits that are kind of templated ways of people getting started. And I think the thing that we're trying to kind of balance is how do we get everybody using the same tools, the same framework, the same libraries, the same standards, but also give them the opportunity and freedom to go beyond that and make it better and make it change it and explore new things. Sure, everybody's using Express now, but there's a big cost of us to even try to change, let's say, Express as a core library that we're using. But there's also a big value because maybe there's performance improvements if we adopt a different library, right? So it's a hard challenge because we're not going to gain any of the knowledge and the benchmarks and the benefits and the metrics if not everybody's on the same tools. But at the same time, we don't want to pigeonhole our developers and limit their experiences by just saying, just use this library and this version, and here's the framework and the starter kit and how things work. So usually what we do is anytime somebody asks a question, again, the role of the architect and my role is let's push them and support them and encourage them to become the champions for experimentation. If somebody says, I don't know about Express, or hey, I don't know about this, great. You want to try something different? I'm going to support you. I'm going to help you. Go out and explore, try things, but then come back and tell us. Be part of that dialogue, right? Because if that dialogue doesn't happen, then that person ends up creating a silo or is now working, outside the spec or not following the best practices. So it goes back to the whole point about this whole thing is about communication, right? Whether you have best practices today or you're establishing them today, expect them to change. And that can only be productive, especially on a big, large team with thousands of developers, if there's a dialogue happening around it and if it's a circular process.
I want you to expand a bit. I know that there's a lot of intentionality put into the why, what, how. Why? Why, what, how?
So I tell people I'm not very opinionated about a lot of things, even though I debate a lot of things.
Wait, no, I don't buy that at all.
I'm happy to change my opinion and I'm happy to discuss anything, right? But the challenge that you have, especially on a large scale, if you're not coming from the same perspective, if you're not talking about the exact same thing, you'll end up wasting a lot of time in debates and end up wasting a lot of time being misaligned from the start and debating something that you're not even talking about the same thing. So this is why one of the very opinionated things that I kind of push all the way is always start with why. Before we even talk, let's use Aaron's example because we're throwing Express under the bus today for some reason. Let's say somebody's wants to talk about the HTTP framework we're using for our servers. Great. Are we saying the same thing? What does HTTP framework means for you and me? Are we on the same page here? Let's talk about the why. Why is this here, and why is this important to us, and why does this matter, and why are we talking about it? If we align on that, then we can immediately reference the what in this context, Express or Fastify or whatever it is, the tool that we want to talk about. And then we can go down into the how. The how is where usually the time is spent the most and where people actually want to talk about. But if you're not aligned on the why and the what first, then you're going to be spending a lot of time. And that's why all of our reference architecture documentation starts with why. When we talk about we're using React for our front end, let's talk about why. Before we even talk about what React is and what it means for us, we talk about why we are talking about React and what does React mean to us and why is it important to us. Then we actually go to defining React. You know what? And this is exactly the example. When I first joined the team, they had picked React, and they didn't document that kind of the conversation of why it was important to pick React. And then every single team member who joined after the fact have asked that question: why are we using React? And the immediate answer is, look at the docs. It says why, and that's the very first thing they see. And then rather than debating React versus Vue or Express versus that and so on, we can talk about the benefits and the value that we actually want. And if we're aligned on the benefits and the value, then guess what? The what doesn't matter.
Right.
Doesn't matter what library you're using, as long as we're aligned on why we're using these libraries and what value they bring. Great. The moment those values change or the moment the purpose changes, then the why gets redefined. Then you can go back and talk about, okay, let's now evaluate what libraries we want and what tools we want.
Right on. So Joel, I want to make sure we get all the way around the horn on this one and explore the best practices and the standards that you're trying to help the team at Walmart Labs to align around.
Yes, I think a lot of what Ahmad said, we echo quite a bit of them, but our practice definitely not as up to date as what TELUS have. For us, when we think of
being late to the game, right?
Yeah.
The last in terms of being early to the game, PayPal and Walmart were early adopters, and when Node was rough, and now TELUS is really building on a stable node, a stable ecosystem, and no longer having to debate whether Nodes is even a viable or valid platform for that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I always looked at PayPal and Walmart for like kind of thought leadership and examples of things you've done in the open source world that actually benefited a lot of the conversations we've done. So thank you.
Yeah, a lot of in the early days when we were first starting with Node.js. I mean, well, Walmart Labs has been on Node.js for quite a few years, but we just try to make it more like widely adopted as a single standard in the company, because before that, the different team have their own little thing like, hey, we're going to do our Node.js, then just go off and do Node.js their own way. So, and what we have when we first start, like, and when we decide on which framework, which tech stack to use, we had a GitHub repo, and then people can just go and file issues. Hey, I have a proposal, and we want to do this, and then everyone and just come and contribute, and obviously you can imagine the different opinion that's flying across, and I mean some proposals, some straightforward ones are like everyone just gonna, hey, thumbs up, but for some other ones, like when we first start, when we say, are we going to go React? Are we going to go Express or Happy? And I mean, some of those proposals, you can just immediately you get about, say, 100 comments back and forth, and ultimately we just come to a consensus, and everyone agree on the or at least agree to disagree at some point, and then and then. Eventually, someone have to give in, and someone have to make some compromise. You if you have a difference in opinion, you just have to present your opinion with all the pros and cons and the points that why you think you take a certain stand. And then even if you cannot completely convince the opposite side of that opinion, at least you can get them to be willing to make a compromise. Eventually, all the important proposals, we will get enough compromise, and everyone says, okay, so let's go with this. So for us, like, unfortunately, we did not actually think of taking all these proposals from GitHub and actually putting a formal documentation. So right now, if anyone comes and they say, why did we do this? Why did we do that? We have to send them, hey, look at this GitHub repo. And then they just kind of have to sort through hundreds of comments sometimes and figure out ultimately how we end up at something.
Right. I mean, it's a simple solution, once you kind of see it, but damn, that's, the amount of useless debate that I've seen teams waste on, there's options in the stack all the way down, and I've spent so much time, debating all of those things, and invariably you get to that point of what problem are we even trying to solve, and by laying out that framing and structuring it that way, I think that's really really compelling.
Yeah, these days, to me, picking a tech stack or a framework has a lot less to do with the actual technology. I mean, how the framework work. I mean, a lot of times, obviously, there are clear choices where some of the technical aspect of certain things really align with what you want to do. But when we are facing with multiple choices and there's similar items, similar points, but maybe the stack just choose to do certain things it's slightly differently. To us, a lot of the choice we make is the technical aspect is kind of low on the things we consider. I mean, it's still fairly high on the list, but the things that's more important to us is time, cost, and maintainability, and being able to scale, and well using these work well with all the other teams and other parts of our company. We're a fairly big e-commerce site, and we run a lot of in-house proprietary technology, and we use a lot of open source projects, or we use some add-ons. And so sometimes the tech stack that we pick for our Node.js ecosystem really has a lot of impact to the schedules and time and the cost and the existing knowledge, existing developer skill set, and how compatible what we pick will work with all our teams have out there already. So those are whenever we have to decide on like certain framework, whether hey, are we going to use this one or that one? Sometimes what comes out on the top as more important is basically not have to do with the technical directly.
Right. So Vince Canavo, asking a great question here, and I want to pull this in to our discussion. So the question is, we're talking about the proliferation and making some of those fundamental architectural choices. How do you prevent too much fragmentation, or are you architecting or forcing folks to comply with a certain pattern where fragmentation isn't an issue?
So for us, we take the philosophy and the approach we take is that we try everything we do, all the modules and the code, and we try to keep things fairly open. What that means is that it's like we don't say this is the only way or no way, and but obviously we have limited resource, and we can't just anyone who comes out, hey, I want to do this differently, and then we have to support them. So one of the things that we typically put out is that hey, this is the way our module does it, and our module is fairly well. The design of our module is such that the core of the module, the core functionality is there, and it's a fairly well exposed. Has a fairly well defined public interface for you to access the core features. However, obviously, we don't want everyone who comes and have to try to figure out the core APIs and then have to come up with their own code to interface with our the core API through the core API with our modules. I mean, like basically, what you call the glue code. So, and we would pick a certain framework and then we would write our glue code according to that framework and that standard, and we put this out there. And typically, most of our app developers they come, and I mean, for them they just want to get the code and finish their task for their sprint. And I mean, typically, obviously, we do have developers who are more prolific and they have a more opinionated and they want to do certain things a certain way. And we tell them, here's the core API, and they're exposed. Obviously, it's not as well documented, and we have limited resource to support them. We'll answer questions, but they're not on they're not the top priority for us because we're limited resource and we have to support all our other teams. And here's the glue code, and the API for glue code. And if you just go with the whole package, here's the 3 lines of code you need on your end to make everything work. And 80% of the time, developers just take that and run with it. Nice. But for certain developers who are fairly opinionated and they want things to work a certain way, or more often than not is that certain developers come and they actually do have a valid business requirement that our glue code we did not consider, and we would either update the glue code part of our APIs and to support them, or like a lot of times those requirements will actually affect the core features also. So basically, if there is a valid business requirement, we would do everything we can to update our code. But if those changes doesn't really make sense, that I want to put that in, but it doesn't feel right now. We're not sure yet. So we would actually come up with a sample or like a reference, and then just give that to the developer, and they take it and they put it into their app and they use it, and we would actually keep up with them. We would say well, hey, how did it go? And if things didn't work out for them, obviously they would come back to us and say, no, that didn't work, or there's something else is wrong. We will constantly work with them to make sure that it meets their requirement. And ultimately, eventually, if another team comes, hey, we need this, and if it's similar to what the other team has asked before, we will say, now we might need to rethink that. It make sense for that to come into our core now, and so we would reevaluate those things and take that and actually discuss and come up with a more formal design and to how to incorporate into our modules. And so back to the choices of tech stacks, and like I said, we try to keep our core features, core APIs separate and like framework agnostic. I mean, it's not always possible, but I mean, we do our best to make that happen. And we do have team, and Walmart is big. I mean, like we have many offices all over the place, and we have very different teams who have never known about each other. And now that we have been doing Node.js, and we try to have a standard set of modules and code and a standard way of doing Node.js apps. We have more and more teams from office that I did not even realize that existed. They come to us and they say, "Hey, I want to do this," and but we've been doing this in this other thing like maybe Angular or Java, or some other. I've had actually maybe even Ruby on Rails, and they've all come. Hey, I heard Node.js is all exciting, and now that you guys have this, we want to see how we can migrate our stuff, but we cannot just switch over completely. And how would you do this? So so that's why a lot of the times, and we would tell them, hey, like none of our modules is tightly coupled with anything. Like you can take any of our modules, and you need to read a little deeper in the documentation. Most likely, you're gonna have to go into the code a little bit yourself to see things, and then there is definitely ways for you to just take a single module of our platform and use that only. You just have to do a little extra work to interface with the core module, and maybe because the glue code may not work well for you. So those are some of the things we have to deal with, and trying to get more teams from Walmart to use the things that we come out from Walmart Labs.
Right. So Ahmed, I know that TELUS does a little bit of everything, and did do a lot of everything. Tell us a little bit about fragmentation and what you've had to deal with.
Yeah, I think the big learning for me as I joined the telco on the inside is that telcos really do everything. We compete with everybody and everything, apparently. Like we have products that compete with Google, we have products that compete with PayPal, we have products that compete with Walmart, and for some reason we're building everything. And I think that's just potentially a bit of the legacy of the history of the way corporations used to be, and the way companies, especially like telcos are, and ISPs in general. It's interesting. But what that affords us is the opportunity to kind of play in all these fields, right? We're not necessarily going to be the best in everything. I mean, I would not put our streaming technology on the same level as Netflix, for example. But hey, where else are you going to say you can work in a place that you can experiment with streaming, with e-commerce, with mobile applications, web applications, infrastructure tooling, sales tools, and so on. There's a lot of diverse kind of areas that a telco would cover. But as you said, that kind of leads to not only fragmentation, but kind of a desire for fragmentation by design, right? Like if you're talking about business units, or if you're talking about functions within the company, then there's definitely you could have easily had a marketing stack separate from infrastructure stack, separate from the network stack, separate from, let's say, the media and TV stack. Or you can also think about it in horizontal context. You can think of an end-to-end stack that represents just the e-commerce parts of just the TV and kind of streaming content. You can think of an e-commerce of just the mobility content and so on. And I'm using some internal examples because some of them are real, some of them are right in my head. But the message here is that businesses like the telcos do a lot, and the opportunities to design your kind of grid of, you want to go vertical, you want to go horizontal, it's real. And what that inevitably leads to, and also on the third part of that is history. Telcos are probably one of the oldest companies around, or the longest surviving companies around, right?
They're the original tech companies, right?
Exactly, literally. They're like the very first phone lines all the way to internet building infrastructures and wireless technologies and satellites and everything in between. So yeah, that history brings legacy, because inevitably there was technology that was built 30 years ago that's still operating in the network. Like I hear stories from some of our folks that are operating the actual telephony networks, and they're like, yeah, there are still good old switch kind of, as you see in movies, I don't even know what to call them.
Right.
Those still exist, and they are still required because some parts of the network are still that old. So if you think about the hardware is still that old, what do you think of the software is? It's probably in the similar kind of scenario. And I think the fragmentation by design is really kind of plays a part here. And I think that was actually a question that was asked by Jeremy on the questions here, the Q&A, but he kind of also answered his own question. Is like, technology at this point and at this rate changes so fast, I cannot tell you what I'm going to be doing next year. Even within the same ecosystem of software and frameworks and tools. I mean, Node.js last year is completely different than Node.js this year, right? And never mind, again, all the fragmentation of technologies around the telco. So yes, our major kind of stack right now is Node.js, and where everything we're heading is Node.js based. We still have Java. We still have a lot of Ruby, old legacy, and PHP legacy in different areas. We still have a lot of kind of like IBM mainframes and all the old technologies that you can imagine. But it's design fragmentation with a purpose of modernization that really is kind of the only way to deal with that, especially because what we're dealing with today in our industry is just so rapidly changing. Can't keep up. I cannot make a plan for the next 5 years because that's just going to be completely different.
Right on. So I'm going to do our second sponsor break here real quick. Aaron, if you can hear my audio, I want to make sure we bring that question back to you with the context of the first enterprise framework really out there with Kraken. Now 4 or 5 years in, and how that plays out. But let me do our break, and then Ahmed, Joel, and Aaron, if you want to point folks that are watching and that are participating in the live stream to your links. Thank you, Daniel, again for posting the links to the TELUS reference architecture. Let's drop the links in the chat, and let folks go beyond just hearing about it and click through and look at GitHub after we're done talking. So second sponsor today is sure, Daniel. No, thank you for including that link. So the second sponsor today is Rising Stack. Rising Stack is helping companies succeed with JavaScript, Node.js, microservices, and Kubernetes. You can head to risingstack.com. Again, deepest appreciation for the team at Rising Stack for hosting me today and letting me stay at the office after everyone's gone home and record Always Forward. So if you're looking for development services, staff augmentation and training around JavaScript, Node.js, microservices, and cloud native ecosystems, Kubernetes, be sure to reach out to Rising Stack for support. All right, so Aaron, fragmentation in a massive Node.js deployment with a framework built to help align the team around how Node.js is done. Team that largely was not familiar with Node.js, coming from a Java background. How's that going?
It's going well. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely taken completely over anything front end related. So we have some different, I would just say, security boundaries, since security is our number one priority, being what we do is manage people's money. So we've got a front tier, which is like the tier which renders UI, and it's what you would be interfacing with, when you're clicking buttons and using PayPal. That's all Node. I mean, maybe there's a tiny percentage left that, no, there certainly is a very tiny, small percentage left, which maybe a little Java. I know there's an old C++ app that's really important that still hasn't quite fully been migrated. But that's all stuff actively being, they put a plan together when they decided before I worked there to go move into the Node.js space, let's identify all these services and let's migrate them, So mostly that's finished. It's not completely there, but it's mostly there. How's it gone? It's gone quite well. I think the big win, there's definitely, there was a learning curve, right? There are a lot of people who had only done Java and C++, Node, and, JavaScript was different. So training those people up, was definitely a factor. But I think overall, that's solved. We have another tier. I wanted to point out, we have other zones. Another important tier is the mid tier, where the front tier talks to mid tier. The mid tier is not exposed publicly. It has access to various other things internally, like data store systems and all that kind of stuff. But that's all protected. Anyway, I don't want to give a whole lot more detail about that, but suffice to say there is a boundary there, and it affects how people typically in the past have thought about what language to choose. We have a robust suite of tools for building mid-tier services in Java today, and there's some tools for Node. There's a lot of tools in the front tier for Node, but there's barely anything else for anything else anymore. That's just not really a thing. So that's how it's played out over, I guess, 5 years or so. This was kind of framed related to fragmentation, as far as discussion goes. I would just say that, it's not like there's only two languages. There are other languages that are popular that people have interested in, like Golang, for example. And I think really what we're, in a general sense, if we have our platform designed with APIs and interfaces, kind of as a service, which are sort of language agnostic, our language, with good interfaces, again, our language tools can be built upon that, whatever language seems to best solve the problem. And then within that language, you may have core functionality you need to support, but if you design good interfaces around that stuff, again, then you can support multiple web frameworks, for example. Maybe it's Restify, Fastify, Express, Happy, Koa, whatever. So I think what I'm trying to say is these interfaces at these layers are very important. and should be emphasized in their importance, because boxing people in too tightly pigeonholes folks more than they really should be, especially on front end. Man, front end, like client side, the stuff changes constantly. And so like we really, you got to stay kind of agnostic there and think about the interfaces you're.
So Ahmad, how like you come from API land? How are you helping folks make good interfaces?
I think
Does anyone make good interfaces?
So for context, like in the past, I also was part of the Open API initiative and like in drafting the future of Swagger, what is now called the Open API spec, and I'm all about interfaces. And because my core belief in that regard is just that when we are dealing with the fragmentation of technology that we have today, and we are dealing with various development personalities and various development purposes and various all that, the only way we can facilitate that is through a kind of strict interface design, or at least a guided interface design, so that not only applications but also people can interface with each other and with each other's applications. In the context, like let's say in TELUS, in the context of what we're dealing with, it's hard to get that end-to-end design vision going, because if I'm going to talk to the network level folks that are designing our networks, their context of security is completely different to my context of security. Their context of performance is completely different to my context of performance. And then, as Aaron said, there's the middleware area too, where like we have a lot of these systems that are not publicly available, not enabled by default, and are built for internal processes or internal systems or integration purposes that are not necessarily the same as I need an API so that the customer can press a button on a web page or a mobile app, right? So there has to be a lot of kind of conversations to bring all these practices to the table, and the interface design language involved there. Sometimes you make kind of reservations, and sometimes you make compromises just to kind of reach the ultimate goal, because we have to think collectively about what's good for the business as opposed to what's good for the one application. And that's where the kind of give and take has to happen. So for example, in the telco industry, there's this thing called TM Forum. It's basically the de facto API format and structure for how to run kind of the operations on a telco level. Has nothing to do with user experience, has nothing to do with building applications or building software. Is just the data objects and the interaction with these data objects for what would be a typical kind of telco use case. So, like things like provisioning IP addresses and adding a new device to a account and a party of accounts and what that means. Those kind of like domain design of the telco. Now, historically, the TELUS, for example, we used to build just purpose-driven APIs. We just build them for every application and everything. But what that leads to is thousands and thousands of APIs that are just left unmaintained and unupgraded, and it's hard to get ownership models around them. So by adopting the TM Forum, at least now we have that baseline, the baseline for all the domain services. But again, those domain services are heavy and big and not necessarily the best use case for application developers. And this is where historically and typically, if you look back at the role of architecture or senior architects, it's like, no, we need to design the domain, and domain is what's good for the business, and all the applications need to consume that domain, which would lead to performance compromises, experience compromises, and so on. But luckily, we're not bound by those mindsets. Instead, we can go to invest in technologies that are modern, that can facilitate kind of creating even more abstractions without relying on humans. So one of those technologies is GraphQL, for example. So as if our interfaces are all domain designed and heavy by choice, then we can facilitate the developer implementing those APIs and interfaces by using technologies like GraphQL, because then they're not bound by that domain design. And that's kind of the theme that I like in terms of, again, going back to answering the question about fragmentation, is that what can you do to facilitate people to interface with each other, not the software, not the technology, but the people, the humans, because they are effectively the ones that you're making your decisions based on. As Joel said, all the technology choices like they're making are basically based on the developer experience more so than what the technology itself, pros and cons, are going to provide, because ultimately the humans are the ones driving that technology. So any sort of interface design that facilitates the human interaction is really the best kind of choice you can make. And then you don't have to make compromises. The compromises can be towards business value as opposed to human value.
Got it. So, Joel, you've had the opportunity. You were one of the earlier collaborators on Kraken at Walmart. You've helped create the Electrode platform. What have you found that is better or or maybe is needed in the difference between having a framework that everyone's using versus having reference architecture that may not be baked into what everyone's building on?
Yeah, so I think the first thing, the first principle when we start with Electro is we don't want to lock in anyone to any framework. And like I said earlier, we do have to make choices as far as what we offer as a primary platform. But we don't want to lock in too much of anything. And if anyone comes and they're strongly opinionated about something, we don't say like you can't. They can go and try to use the core APIs we offer them and come up with their own code that could use certain things that they feel strongly about. And for example, on the difference between Kraken and what we have at Walmart Labs, one of the differences is obviously we make the choice to go with Happy versus Express, and that was one of the biggest GitHub proposal issue we had. Actually, I mean, it ran the longest, it has the most comments, and ultimately, some of the reason that we went with Happy versus Express really did not have to do with the technical aspect. Actually, like one of the reasons that we put up was actually sentimental, because Happy was developed at Walmart Labs for a few years, and of course, more than that, it's because of the developers we have who are more familiar with Happy. People who are not familiar with Node.js, even that they were familiar with Happy, and we had quite a few of the original team or the developer in the original team that was working on Happy that was still at Walmart Labs. We have a lot of in-house expertise, knowledge on that, right. And to that, of course, we did look at the design choices Happy make versus Express, and the pros and cons of those choices. Express, if you look online, one of the biggest thing about Express versus Happy is that Express is a lot faster than versus Happy, and I consider that slightly misleading. And obviously, Happy does have more overhead versus Express, and so like if you have no work, Happy may take extra half a millisecond to do all the extra overhead work was Express, because Express design philosophy is to be as lightweight as possible. But on the flip side of that, Happy has made a choice to be very, very well designed and have a very structured design from beginning to support enterprise or large scale applications.
Like you can do anything with Express.
Yeah. So I mean, Express. I mean, even for new developers who's first time exposed to Express, they come in like, what Express? Well, it's just you do app, and then you add your middleware and you get your route, and boom, that's it. And then you go Happy.
What have you done in the enterprise context?
Yeah. So it's kind of like a wild west thing. I mean,
right.
Kind of. But if you go Happy, like you have to learn what is this life cycle thing or this plugin thing, and so there is a lot of restriction. At least like that when you go with Happy, and to us actually that is a plus for us, because when we were when we first started, we thought we don't want to build a new framework, and so it's going to call a platform, but really we don't. It may not even be for the lack of a better name, we call it a platform, but it's really just a collection of modules. Each module is designed to support a core functionality with some glue code that makes using it much easier. And so when we thought about that, we thought, okay, how are we going to do the glue code? And if we use Express, because there's no defined structure of how middleware are used in Express, there's no way for us to control how our middleware is going to be used, and we would have to go out and really document, like, you need, when you use this middleware, you have to make sure that it can't be after that middleware kind of thing. But with Happy, it has a well-defined life cycle, has plugin, so we just offer plugin, and once our developer kind of use our glue code and load the Happy plugin, we have a certain assurance that's guaranteed that our code will run in the context it should be. And in fact, to me, I think one of the major things about Kraken was that Kraken defines a life cycle on top of Express. That's what it is to me. So yeah. So that's some of the experiences, some of the technical things that we went through when we did that.
So, if you all have been paying attention to the things I've been nattering on about over the past year or so, I have been encouraging collaboration and evaluating where we're going in terms of standards. So we have platform leaders from 3 major enterprise organizations here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts of what are the things that now that we're heading into more of a maturity phase of enterprise application development with Node.js. What are the things that you'd like to see us begin to pull forward? The common components, common needs of enterprise application development that we need to just say, all right, you need to have X, Y, or Z out of the box, and it's not optional. Aaron, do you want to kick it off and let's keep it brief and circulating rather than going deep. What would be the first thing that you would say every enterprise Node.js app really needs?
For me, it's all about the metrics and telemetry, the ability to see what's going on in your app. Doing that right really means that somebody is probably supporting a much more complicated high performance logging and metrics collection visualization tool. We use it for Node. We could, that's an area we could do a little better because we have some stuff out of the box available, but I think we could make that better. But yeah, any tool, you need to know what's going on. You need to be able to debug issues. The faster you can debug them, the sooner you can solve the problem for your users. Identifying those performance bottlenecks, et cetera, just debugging common issues. That visibility introspection is super important. So that's number one.
I've been enterprise application standards. Is it too early?
But is it in the context of something like Node, or in the context of as like a developer workflow?
It could be outside of Node. Ultimately, we're building robust applications, and in an enterprise context, you probably need to ensure that the same standards are deployed across Node, across your Go, across your Java. I think both are relevant and possibly influenced by this cross-cutting concerns.
Right, and I think we kind of have a lot of those things already, like in the context for like depending on the context. So in the context of security, then you have the OWASP kind of standards. In the context of privacy, then you have all these PIA and privacy kind of standards to follow. In the context of even further like financial transaction, maybe Aaron can point a few out, but like there's ISO standards to follow, right? And certification to follow. So there's all these kind of existing kind of industry agreed upon standards and kind of best practices to follow. What I think is missing from that, and it doesn't have to be enterprise in particular, but what I think is missing from that is kind of like when we talk about inner sourcing, right? Like as Aaron mentioned, that is a slightly different than open sourcing, and even open source as a community and as a thing doesn't have a standard, doesn't have a workflow, doesn't have a playbook. Maybe similarly, we have something internally that's a playbook or a standard or a process or a workflow for how to successfully do inner source within a company. And those are the kind of enterprise standards I would want to see in the context of humans. In the context of technology, I think we have plenty. And I also kind of worry from investing too much in standards and technology, because then we'll just go back to web services and those kind of good old standards back then.
Right.
The Oasis web services standards, if anybody recalls those, and the XML world. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to live in that world. And the reason why is because the more constraints you create on the systems, the more kind of waste you will produce in kind of trying to adhere to those constraints, as opposed to challenging the norms and trying to create new paths and identify the areas of improvements.
Nice. Joel, what would you like to see, standardized, across, what you and Ahmad and Aaron are working on?
I think in Node.js, one of the things that's a constantly problem for us is actually application performance monitoring, kind of like what Aaron was saying. So our developers, they're always trying to figure out how can we debug things on production, and the only thing is how much telemetry and instrumentation we can get Node.js to send back to our servers, logging servers. And so obviously we had to implement some logging instrumentation solutions, and we found that occasionally logging actually it ends up being one of the part that uses a lot of the resources.
Right.
And we're constantly trying to find ways to reduce the resource that logging is using. I mean, it's something that it's kind of like insurance.
Right. Totally.
You don't want it, but you need it when you need it.
You're gonna let it out.
So I mean, like initially, like our logging is using in upwards of 30 to 40% resources, because our developer they want to have every single piece of information. I mean, we were logging like the entire cookies, the entire HTTP headers, and so each log entry can go up to like 2 or 3K, and every request that comes in generates 100K log instrumentation information, and we realize that's not going to work, so we have to reduce it. But so we actually always have to find the right balance. And obviously the other thing is that we are constantly look out for is security, and so I mean there's no stopping writing code that's insecure. We have static analysis tool to analyze the code, but once the code is running in production, what can we have to catch security vulnerabilities at runtime? It's always a very tricky thing, and we're constantly looking for solutions and trying to evaluate what we can do, but at the same time minimize the resource it would take to monitor those kind of things.
Aaron, you wanted to jump into something else on in terms of standardization. What do you think about logging? You've been around in the Node ecosystem for a long time. One of the biggest consternations that I've had Java folks come and just like be frustrated about is, they're used to, log4j as a standard, and all of logging in Java kind of iterates and, builds off of, really, stable sort of standardized approach. And Node, we never quite went there. And I always expected us to turn that corner.
I don't know. I don't have super strong opinion about logging. Let me point out that I may drop off at any minute when my laptop dies. Yeah. But I mean, as far as logging goes, I mean, there's a few good projects out there. They're used a lot. We use them at PayPal. I early on, I thought we should standardize something, but I don't know how important it is. I think what's important is that you choose something for your organization. Maybe your organization has 3 teams in it. Maybe it has 50 teams. I don't know. Choose something and integrate it with your tools. I think that's what's important. And if a different company wants to use a different tool that is working for them, great. I mean, maybe there's more than the last time I checked, but there were a few popular ones that seem to be really helpful. And then on the other side of logging, there's tools that are all about debugging. I mean, this stuff isn't clear to anybody that I ever talked to. I mean, it's just kind of what are you comfortable with? What's going to work for you? Please don't log too much, but provide a switch to turn it on when you need it. Crank it up under some circumstances, crank it down generally. I mean, it impacts performance directly, so that's why I care more than.
Just a quick thing about logging is that because Node.js is asynchronous, a lot of our developers who came from Java, who's used to the serial execution, it takes them a long time to get used to this. What you see is not what you get kind of thing because it's asynchronous. Right. So I think a way async is going to help a lot, but we're going in the right direction, definitely.
Right on. Ahmad, did you work with the team to lay out any opinions? I don't at the high level, logging does not hit the top bullet list of the reference architecture. Did you lay out anything around logging?
Yeah. So my perspective on these kind of topics and issues is I don't know if even the language should be the one to solve these problems. And to your point, because these are problems that are going to happen across any language. And so what is the standard there? And I think the world we're in today with containers and with containerization and with kind of distributed systems lends its way better to solve these kind of challenges and problems. So, when we talk about, let's say, logging, then fine, just let the container just spit out the information, let other processes like Fluentd just gather them and use products like Stackdriver or other kind of log tools to aggregate that, and let every team do their own inspection of the logs at that point. At that point, your application is not suffering any performance impacts, right? Likewise, when you're talking about debugging, you're talking about instrumentation, all of that, make sure that your environments are set up in such a way that you have a repeatable path from production to testing to staging, so that it's the same artifact that you're generating and you can actually debug your application everywhere. And again, I think a lot of that is thanks to virtualization, which wouldn't have happened if, containerization, which wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for virtualization. And again, the idea of practices like build smaller units of code, build microservices, don't build monoliths, right? It's definitely going to be harder to monitor monoliths. It's definitely going to be harder to debug them and log informations and transactions happening around them. But then if you have smaller microservices and smaller units of production, then you don't care as much about logging what's happening inside the function as much as the input and the output around it, right? Especially if you go down the path of serverless as functions as a service, right? So to me, those are the ways I would better off solve these kind of challenges and questions rather than libraries or frameworks or tools within the code base. Because again, going back to the point earlier, technology is going to change so fast. I mean, today we're using Node.js. Maybe next year we'll all be using Deno for all we know.
Right.
Or Go, language, who knows? But if that's the point, if I want to change to Go, then I don't have to solve the same problems all over again. the metaphor still stands: containerization, a distributed system, microservices. So I don't have to invest as much time all over again every time.
Yeah. So
Great.
for us, just a quick thing. So for us, we are moving to Kubernetes and Docker, and for the instrumentation transport, we are all standardizing on using Kubernetes and then Fluentd. So no app, no container will even bother with transport. They just output to this STD out, and Kubernetes take care of the rest.
Nice.
That's how our stack is.
Awesome. Well, let's end it right there. Ahmad, Joel, Aaron, thank you so much for taking the time. It's a great discussion. Let me make sure I give you each time to plug anything that you want to. I will go first with Aaron, who we're skating in the last little bit of battery here.
Yeah, thanks. Just quickly, PayPal, we're always hiring. We love Node. We're into the containerization space as well, and there's a lot going on. We need more help all the time. A lot of teams need help. I might be getting my laptop might be dying. Everybody's freezing, but I'll try to drop a link in here. It was a pleasure speaking with everybody. I had a really good time today.
Thanks, Aaron. Thank you. Joel?
Yeah, so Walmart Labs and Walmart, I mean, it's like a lot of people may not think of Walmart as like a technology company, but we are very, very big technology company, and we have a lot of interesting technology going on. We have huge machine learning. We use all kind of stacks and language like Golang, Clojure, Java, and we're looking for all kind of engineers and developers and even data scientists, and we are especially looking for like really good Node.js and React.js developers. Thank you.
Awesome. Where should people go to find out more about the opportunities there?
I'll drop the link for our job site.
Awesome. Thanks, Joel. Ahmad.
I'm going to plug a couple of things. Definitely, we're hiring Node, React, all those fun things, middlewares, APIs, front ends, mobile apps. Go to tellus.com/digital. I also run a community called the Tech Masters. It's around 6,000 technologists and developers from all around the world. We do conferences and events and meetups. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. It's techmasters.chat. Follow me on Twitter for all the other stuff that I will not go through now and plug, because Dan will get upset because I have a long list of things I can plug. But follow me on Twitter and you'll start seeing announcements and kind of tweets about those things coming up.
Excellent. Thank you, Ahmad. I have a thing that I've been helping the team at Node Summit this year roll out training. Node Summit's been this anchor event where it's told the evolution of the enterprise story. In the past, we've kind of focused on telling the story of Node's viability in the enterprise. We've achieved that now, and it's time to share some of the pain, some of the success, and where things are going in the future. This year we're adding training, and so we have 2 days of training added to that to help folks that are investing in Node.js improve their Node.js skills. So check out training days at Node Summit this year. So Ahmad, Joel, Aaron, thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next month on Always Forward with D. Shaw.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.